So I have really small hands. I've noticed that I have had issues on the flute that my larger handed friends don't really have. And I just wanted to share them with you today. I've mentioned this part before, but I thought I'd complete this video and mention it again. I have to rest the flute against the meaty part of, well, it's not very meaty anymore, as you can see. I've like worn it down completely. What used to be the meaty part between the first joint and your knuckle, like right on the side here. You can actually see me doing this in all of my Flute Center of New York review videos because I don't put my Fingerport on there. The problem is that when I have my hand like that, it actually forces my whole hand and all of my fingers to lie very low on the flute. When I play like this, my fingers are quite flat, especially my pinky. After a while, you can't really move very fast like this. So with this guy, this is a Fingerport. It gives me a lot of extra height off of the flute. If I were to get a new Fingerport, it might actually be a little bit taller and more angled. I've worn down all of the corners now. What this allows me to do is rest this Fingerport lower on my hand, right on the side of the knuckle instead. My whole hand now sits higher on the flute. When I put it up to my face, it allows those fingers to now be naturally curved. I noticed this the most when I was watching my friends with larger hands play the flute. Whenever they bring the flute up to their face, their fingers are just naturally curved like this. But when you have a smaller hand, your fingers have to be flat or else you can't actually reach the keys and you can't cover the holes if you have an open hole flute. That was my solution for my left hand. So the solution for the left hand was very, very easy. It's the right hand that gets a little bit dicey. On top of having small hands, I have a short thumb. If you look here, my thumb only reaches like just over my knuckle. I've also mentioned this part before too. So when I play the flute, if I wanted that really nice kind of relaxed curve, if you look here, you see how my thumb doesn't even make contact with the flute? I don't actually use this Thumbport for its intended purpose. The intended purpose is to readjust the balance of the flute so that you're not putting all of the weight on your pinky. At least that's what I've read. I use this as a full-on extension. So instead of having to make contact with the flute, I'm just making contact with the Thumbport. That way I can have this nice relaxed curve. What I was doing before was I had to bring my thumb all the way down here, and then I would end up playing like this, which is sort of a claw motion, and you can see my palm kind of scrunching up like a taco. That creates a lot of tension and you can't go very fast. Now on to the actual really fun part. The pinky situation for me on the flute is really interesting. I have a D-sharp roller and it helps, but my pinky is still so small that when I slide from this key to down here, it seems like it's very, very easy, but what often happens is I get caught here. You see how my pinky just gets caught? It gets caught on the side and I can't quite make it past. So it makes this little like weird hop over. I think that only happens because my pinky is that small that it can actually get caught behind the C and the C sharp key. It would be nice if there was also a roller on those keys as well for those of us who have very, very small pinkies. So my solution to this is like completely a hack job solution, but for those of you who have the same problem too, you can see if this helps you. What I have trained myself to do is I have to look ahead in my music and see if I have like a low C sharp or a low C coming up, and if I absolutely necessarily have to do the slide. If I don't have to do the slide, I have actually taught myself to tune the notes that I am cheating by lifting the pinky up to the correct pitch, to the correct frequency, so that when I'm going at full speed, you can't tell that I've lifted up the pinky. Not only the tuning, but I've actually also messed with like just the tone production. So I'm matching the tonal quality to how I normally would play it with the pinky key. The E is the most apparent one. And in fact, you are supposed to at all times keep the pinky key down because you can hear the difference. And then without. So I'm gonna go back and forth so you guys can hear. guys can hear the difference, right? As an example, I learned to tune the E without the pinky to the E with the pinky. This was done fully out of desperation because small pinky problems. That way I could just go from E to low C, for example. I would just go. For those of you who have a very discerning ear, you can still hear like the slightest difference, but when it's done in practice, you can't actually tell. Are you supposed to do this? Technically, no, you're not supposed to. Sometimes my pinky is just not wanting to work that day. I have developed this way as a backup solution. You probably noticed that I can force myself to do the slide properly because I know that that C is coming up. I'm actually resting the side of my pinky already against the C key and the C sharp key. If my pinky is angled this way, it can get stuck more easily. Whereas if it's angled the opposite way and I have the side of the pinky touching those keys already, it's a lot smoother. But I have to remember to do that because my pinky doesn't naturally want to sit at that angle. It took me a long time to teach myself how to do it because essentially you have to teach yourself. It doesn't matter how much your teacher shows you. Your teacher's hand is not your hand. So you do have to experiment around, really figure it out. I watched my teacher a lot. My teacher worked with me a lot on it. Eventually, I figured out how to do it on my own hand. I guess this solution would be a more proper solution to the whole sliding issue. Now, the last thing that I had to teach myself on my right hand especially was the spacing of the keys. Let's say I was doing something like G to D. Not only do you have the main problem that most people have, which is that your index finger and your middle finger are like the two strong ones, whereas your ring finger and your pinky are the weak ones. So timing them can be a little bit tricky because typically your index finger and your middle finger will move too fast while your ring finger will not move fast enough. So you have that main problem too that everyone else has, but when you have small hands and you have small fingers, the spacing of these keys is actually a little bit wider than what you expect. My hand is actually far more comfortable on a piccolo because they're all spaced really close together. When you're just kind of relaxing, you're holding it like in this position. If I were to put that right onto a flute, you see how that does not actually fit. So I actually have to space my fingers out a little bit too. So I also had to memorize this spacing. I can do it in midair now. It really irons out all the blips and stuff in your technique. With my hands being so small, if I don't do it this way, I will end up only, covering half the hole here or half the hole there and slipping and sliding and stuff like that. As an add-on note to this, you have to be aware that when your pinky slides over to the keys down here, that this finger, your ring finger, will want to go with it. If your ring finger is not as dependent on your pinky, you may not have this problem as much. My ring finger is fairly dependent on the pinky. Like I can't bring my pinky down and only lift my ring finger. As you can see, like I'm struggling right now. What I also had to teach myself was if I am sliding down to the low C like this, in order to keep my ring finger here on this key, like to you guys, it looks like it's not moving, right? But in my head, my ring finger is actually moving the opposite ways. I basically trained myself to learn how to move my ring finger and my pinky in opposite directions. I feel like I'm going like this. Otherwise, if I don't think of it that way, my ring finger will just follow my pinky and then I'll end up only covering about like half the hole. I use these tricks all the time. They work for me, and if you have small hands, I hope they work for you too. If you are a teacher with larger hands but you have a student with smaller hands, see if these tricks help them and let me know if they work. That's it for today's video. You can hang out with me on Twitch throughout the week. I live stream my practice sessions, and you can also hang out with me on Patreon in a more casual setting. But otherwise, I'll see you guys next week. Bye.